Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back in time, far beyond Instagram filters and K-beauty serums, into a world where looking beautiful meant risking your life, literally. Picture yourself in a stone-cold medieval chamber, flickering candlelight bouncing off a polished pewter mirror. You're dabbing a sticky, stinging paste onto your face. It smells like vinegar and something vaguely metallic. That's because it is metallic. Congratulations, you've just smeared lead on your cheeks. The goal, that coveted ghostly complexion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, because whether it's 3 a.m. in Kentucky or 9 p.m. in Islamabad, we're winding down together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a noblewoman in 14th century France, and looking tan is not a flex. Pale skin equals status, clear proof you're rich enough to never set foot in the sun. Your servants do the farming, you lounge inside, stitching tapestries and sipping broth. But what if your natural skin tone is annoyingly human? No problem. Your beauty kit includes ceruse, a lovely mixture of vinegar and white lead. You layer it on like frosting. It whitens, yes, but it also slowly poisons you. Over time, your skin might crack, your teeth could loosen, and your brain might take a vacation without returning. But you look stunning. Maybe. Historians still argue whether women knew the dangers of these substances or just saw side effects as the price of glamour. Some scholars believe they even considered these effects to be refinements. That purplish flush from lead poisoning, so elegant. You add a touch of vermilion, mercury sulfide, yum, to your cheeks and lips. Think blush, but made wit. Actual mercury. Your tongue tingles. Normal? Probably. There's also egg whites, which you smear to give your skin that glossy porcelain look. It tightens everything. You can barely blink. Your face is now a medieval egg custard. The good news? You'll look divine for about 20 minutes. Beauty was brutal, not just because of the tools, but because of the standards. If your skin had even a hint of warmth, sunburn, freckles, or God forbid a mole, people assumed you were poor, sexually promiscuous, or spiritually corrupt. No pressure. The ideal beauty didn't look alive so much as half-preserved. White skin suggested purity, but also fragility, a strange combo of angelic and consumptive. You wanted people to look at you and think, that woman has never lifted a bucket in her life. Bonus points if they're also thinking, is she okay? There's an absurd irony here. The most attractive trait was one that made you look like you were about to faint. And people really did faint, often. Between tight laces, poor nutrition, and chemical exposure, you might keel over during a feast. At least someone would catch you and say, she's so delicate. Even peasants picked up on this trend. If you were lucky enough to own a mirror and some flour, you could slap on a little whitening powder before church. It might just earn you a glance from a passing merchant, or more likely get you scolded by your mother for wasting bread ingredients. Sometimes they didn't even need makeup. Plague survivors, often gaunt and pale from illness, unintentionally looked trendy. Post-Black Death chic, anyone? Of course, fashion comes in cycles. What's bizarre now was once aspirational, kind of like the 2000s low-rise jeans, but worse. And don't forget, these looks weren't just about beauty, they were about power. If you could afford to ruin your health for aesthetics, it meant you had options. The freedom to waste resources, that porcelain glow, it was a class badge, shimmering with danger. Your face might itch, your gums might bleed, but you're admired. And in this darkened, candlelit world, what more could you want? You sit on a wobbly stool near the hearth, holding a small bronze mirror that warps your reflection just enough to make you question everything. In the dim light, you begin the most bizarre part of your daily routine. Plucking your forehead. Yes, the whole forehead, hairline to brow. Welcome to the 14th century, where having a towering forehead is not a sign of male pattern baldness, but feminine allure. You grip a pair of dull iron tweezers and start tugging. Each pull stings like a bee bite. You wince, but this is the cost of beauty. The goal is to make your forehead look massive, like an empty canvas stretching toward heaven. A wide, smooth dome means intellect and nobility, or so people have decided. And if you're noble, your thoughts must take up physical space, right? Eyebrows? Gone. Plucked clean. Sometimes even the eyelashes get the chop. Why? Because hair on the face was seen as primitive, animalistic. The ideal woman should resemble an ethereal being, serene, hairless, oddly spherical up top. One monk even described ideal feminine beauty as like a pale moon, cold, distant, and void of unnecessary features, romantic. Now, if you're wondering how far this went, some women applied walnut oil or cat feces to slow the regrowth. You heard me? Cat feces. It was believed to work as a primitive hair inhibitor. We're not saying it did work, but you're still smearing it on, just in case. Historians still argue whether these routines were performed daily or just for special events like court appearances or weddings. But evidence from surviving toiletry kits shows that tweezers were carried often, sometimes as necklace charms. That's right. Your most painful tool is also a fashion statement. And it wasn't just women. Men, too, plucked their hairlines to appear more refined. The difference was that they were allowed to keep their eyebrows. Lucky devils. In some courts, particularly in England under Henry VI, the fashion became so extreme that noblewomen would end up with foreheads stretching nearly to the back of their skulls. Portraits from this era look less like human beings and more like featureless eggs in gowns. But this wasn't just vanity. It was an arms race of status. If one duchess had a high forehead, her rival had to outdo her. Pluck higher, smoother, cleaner. It didn't matter if your scalp began to show. In fact, that might have helped. There's even folklore suggesting that women rubbed crushed ivy or vinegar on their skin to chemically burn away hair. Painful? Absolutely. But the effect was temporary smoothness, and in medieval terms, smoothness meant superiority. The fun part? After all this torment, you had to paint your missing eyebrows back on using charcoal or soot. You wanted those lines arched just enough to signal chastity, but not so arched that you looked seductive. It's a tightrope walk between nun and courtesan. Sometimes fashion goes full circle, right? People today tattoo their eyebrows on, but at least no one's plucking out their hairline to look like a noble from 1452, we hope. Here's the kicker. Not everyone could participate in this trend. If you were a peasant or labourer, pulling out your facial hair would just make you look ill. You needed every follicle for warmth, protection, and dignity. For them, hair wasn't optional, it was survival. And so, once again, beauty becomes a dividing line. A hairy, painful, comically high dividing line between those with luxury and those with labour. As you sit there with a red, puffy face, squinting at your reflection, the church bell tolls in the distance. Time to attend mass with a forehead so grand it could host a chessboard. You walk into the nave, your face a gleaming canvas of effort, pain and social strategy, and someone still asks, "Did you forget your eyebrows today?" You shuffle through the castle corridors in soft leather slippers, trying not to smile too widely. Not because you're unhappy, but because your teeth might betray you. They're not exactly pristine. In fact, they're kind of grey, or maybe brown, and honestly, you're lucky they're still there. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages isn't what you'd call advanced. Brushing your teeth involves a twig, some salt, and a prayer. If you're wealthy, you might chew mint leaves or rinse with rose water. If you're poor, you chew on herbs or bits of cloth. Toothpaste? You wish. Tooth pain? Constant companion. But that doesn't mean teeth were irrelevant to beauty. Quite the opposite. A woman's smile had to be small, closed, and demure. If you had white, straight teeth, that was divine, almost literally. In some religious texts, saints were described as having pearl-like teeth. But for everyday folks, especially nobility, dental decay was almost expected. Why? Because sugar was rare and expensive, and when nobles did get it, they went wild. They believed sugar had medicinal properties. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether early dental rot among nobles was seen as an indulgent side effect or a shameful flaw to be hidden behind tight lips. So now, back in your dim chamber, you're applying a homemade mouthwash made from burnt rosemary and white wine. It stings, but it masks the smell of decay. You follow it with powdered charcoal to brighten the teeth. Ironically, it makes them darker, but you feel cleaner, kind of. One bizarre trend that pops up in late medieval Italy: darkened teeth on purpose. Some sources suggest it was briefly fashionable among elite women to blacken their molars using crushed cloves or even ink. The logic? If people assume your teeth are naturally dark, they won't judge the rot. It's beauty as preemptive damage control. There's also the kiss factor. A beautiful woman was expected to have sweet breath, which, let's be honest, was almost impossible, so perfumed cloths and breath-freshening herbs became accessories. You'd hold a little bundle of mint, clove, and dried rose petals near your mouth. Not only did it smell nice, it hid your halitosis. Of course, the church had opinions about all of this. Excessive attention to teeth, especially whitening, was condemned as vanity, but that didn't stop women from rubbing crushed sage or salt directly onto their gums. Painful? Yes. Effective? Barely. But it meant you were trying. And let's not forget the terrifying dental solutions. If a toothache got unbearable, you had two options. 1. Pray to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dental pain, or 2. Go to the barber surgeon. He'd yank that sucker out with iron pliers while you screamed into a leather strap. Beauty is pain, and blood, so much blood. Now imagine you're at a feast. A roasted pig sits in the centre, dripping fat onto a gilded tray. You pick delicately at the food, careful not to bite into anything too hard. A cracked molar could mean weeks of agony, so you avoid smiling, chew softly, and keep your lips pressed into a mysterious, noble pout. But there's a strange upside to all this. The fewer teeth you had, the more soup you got. Nobles were often served pureed dishes, luxurious, creamy, soft foods because chewing was genuinely dangerous. Who knew losing your molars came with perks? And just for fun, here's a fringe tidbit. Some lovers exchanged teeth as tokens of affection. That's right, like lockets or love notes, but way grosser. Here, my love, take my bicuspid. Romantic. So there you are, face powdered, eyebrows missing, teeth gently decaying beneath a veil of clove oil. The standards say you should look like a porcelain doll carved from ivory with a breath like blooming roses. But in reality, you're hanging on with mint sprigs and medieval mouthwash. And still somehow someone glances your way across the feast hall. Perhaps your breath isn't as offensive as you thought, or maybe they just can't see your teeth in this candlelight. Either way, you hold their gaze and do not smile. You wake up with a dull ache across your torso again. That's the linen wrap wound tight beneath your gown to press your waist into something barely human. You sit up slowly, careful not to twist, because even breathing too deep can hurt. You're chasing the dream, the impossibly tiny waist. Long before corsets became the torture device of choice, medieval women had other, subtler weapons. Linen bindings, thick belts, and clever tailoring all worked to create that ideal hourglass silhouette, minus the actual hourglass. You're not exactly curvy, just cinched. The goal is a waist so narrow it could be encircled by a man's hands, or at least that's how poets describe it. Slender as a willow branch, they say. Delicate as a stem. What they don't mention is how hard it is to eat while wrapped like a sausage. Historians still argue whether these tight bindings were daily wear or more ceremonial, reserved for festivals, court visits, and marriage markets. But a growing body of archaeological evidence suggests this practice wasn't limited to the elite. Even middle-class women in places like 14th century Flanders were known to modify their silhouettes, sometimes using padded hips to exaggerate the contrast. That's right, while you're squashing your ribs, you're also adding bulk to your lower half. Hip rolls, padded skirts, and extra fabric layers make your waist seem smaller by comparison. It's medieval optical illusion meets chronic back pain. Now, let's talk materials. If you're wealthy, your gown is stiff wool or even silk, layered over heavy chemises. If you're not, it's scratchy homespun, still layered, still hot. Either way, your body can't breathe. In summer, pure misery, but you can't skip it. Beauty is obligation. And what about eating? Carefully. Nobles dined on stews and pastes for a reason. Chewing is overrated when you're being gently compressed by medieval shapewear. You sip broth, chew soft bread, and try not to belch. Because elegance. There's an absurd little trick some noblewomen used during long events. They'd tighten the wrap after arriving. Why? So their entrance looked effortless, like they'd just naturally come with an 18-inch waist. But once seated, they'd have to remain nearly motionless, praying no one offered them roasted goose. Of course, men weren't immune to waist-related fashion. Some nobles wore tightly belted tunics to emphasize a narrow torso. In late medieval France, doublets were padded at the shoulders but cinched at the waist, almost like proto-tailoring. The result, you're both struggling to breathe at the banquet. And here's a quirky tidbit. In 15th century Spain, slimness wasn't always about physical shape. It was linked to moral discipline. A woman with a small waist was thought to possess inner restraint. If you couldn't tighten your belt, clearly you couldn't control your appetite or your desires, so your figure doubled as your confession. The church, of course, had opinions. Beauty-seeking wasn't inherently sinful, but vanity was. A woman who spent too much time binding her waist might be accused of pride, or worse, trying to seduce. But these lines were blurry. One priest declared that a lady's modesty may be found in her silhouette. Go figure. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to pass out. The pressure leaves red marks across your belly. You hide them under layers of linen and keep moving, trying to look serene. There's a wedding in the village square today, and everyone's dressed up. You've wrapped a thick cord around your waist, tied tight at the back. Your breathing is shallow, your pace glacial, but you look stunning, or so you hope. An old woman passes you and tuts disapprovingly. She remembers a time when women didn't have to crush their ribs to be considered lovely, but you just smile, barely, and nod. Times change, standards stay impossible. At the feast that follows, you decline the honey cakes, not because you're not hungry, but because there's no room for them inside your torso. You sip wine and lean carefully against the table, hoping to look dainty and elegant. Inside, your organs are squabbling for space, and somewhere deep down, you wonder, how did this become normal? The sun is barely up, and already you're fussing with your reflection. You're chasing something hard to name, a certain innocent glow, they call it. The kind of look that says you've never known hardship, never known lust, never even sweated. You need to look like a virgin, not just be one, look like one. The term of the day, maidenly flush, a gentle bloom in the cheeks, soft colour in the lips, just enough to suggest purity and health, but not enough to suggest you're, well, interested. You begin by dabbing a bit of rouge made from crushed cochineal beetles, or if you're lucky and fancy, red ochre. Applied to the cheeks, it gives you that barely alive vibe nobles seem to love. The problem is, sometimes it gives you the clearly allergic look too. You blend carefully. There's no such thing as over-the-top contouring in 1350, but too much rouge might make people whisper. To get the glow just right, you pinch your cheeks, hard, not because it's fast, but because it hurts just enough to make you look convincingly naturally flushed. You might even slap yourself lightly before entering a feast. Beauty tip: medieval blushing is about as natural as powdered wigs. Of course, there's a shortcut. Belladonna, a plant with a reputation darker than your eyeliner. You drip a tiny amount into your eyes to make your pupils dilate. Wider eyes equals more innocent, more alluring. The problem? Belladonna means beautiful woman for a reason, but it's also deadly. Literally, you're putting a neurotoxin in your eyeballs to look coy. Historians still argue whether women understood the long-term risks of belladonna, blurred vision, eventual blindness, heart issues, or whether they believed its effects were magical. Either way, it became a status marker. Only a noblewoman could afford the luxury of eye poison. There's more. Women dabbed vinegar or even urine on their skin to achieve a cleansed glow. Sometimes they'd rub onions or crushed radishes on their face before washing it off with rose water. One folk recipe calls for snail slime. That's right, snail slime. Applied in the moonlight for best results. Skincare by candlelight and nightmares. The contradiction of it all is almost funny. You're trying to look untouched, but you're applying things that would make a goat cry. You want to seem soft, but your routine is anything but. You want to be desirable, but only in a distant, impossible, I've never spoken to a man sort of way. And then there's the fragrance. You perfume yourself lightly, not too much or people will talk. Just a dab of rose oil behind the ears, maybe a little lavender on your sleeve. In some courts they believed a maiden's scent should be so faint it can only be detected during a close embrace, which of course would be scandalous. So, no one's supposed to smell you at all. Here's a quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Germany, noble girls were sometimes rubbed with bread soaked in milk and honey to soften the skin. They'd lie in bed, face slathered in carbs, praying the mice didn't notice. There's beauty sleep, and then there's bakery sleep. And the clothes? Whisper-thin veils and pastel gowns help the illusion. You're supposed to look like a flower about to wilt, slippers barely tied, hair loose enough to suggest wildness, but not so loose that you seem immodest. Men, especially poets, loved this look. In sonnets, women's cheeks blushed like apple skins, their skin cool as marble, and their demeanour gentle as snowfall. Conveniently, no one asked these women how they felt, probably itchy, or dizzy, or both. Even the church had a love-hate relationship with this glow. Looking virginal was admirable, but trying to look virginal, that bordered on deception. Some priests warned against false modesty, accusing women of painting chastity upon their cheeks. Still, the pews were full of powdered ladies looking innocent as lilies, and every one of them knew where to get the good belladonna. So you head to the gathering, eyes just slightly too wide, cheeks glowing like a dying ember. You speak softly, hold your posture, and avoid eye contact with anyone interesting. You're not just playing the part, you are the part. And behind it all, you're trying not to blink too fast because your pupils are dilated and your vision is starting to go a little foggy. But hey, you look pure. The sun is brutal today, but you don't move from your spot by the window. You're perched awkwardly on a wooden bench, head tilted back, face sweating, scalp sizzling. The smell rising from your hair is alarming, like something between rotten eggs and singed wool. That's because you've soaked your hair in a paste made from sulfur, ash and stale urine, a classic medieval blonde treatment. Yes, urine. Welcome to the world of blonde ambition medieval edition. Light hair is all the rage, especially in Italy and parts of France. It's seen as angelic, pure, even divine. Artists depict the Virgin Mary as blonde. Saints glow with golden halos and golden locks. You're a brunette. Unacceptable. Historians still argue whether natural blondes were more highly prized, or if artificial blonding was considered just as fashionable. But one thing's clear. If you weren't born with it, you'd suffer to fake it. To start, you apply your custom bleach blend, a cocktail of quicklime, lye and urine mixed with lemon juice if you're lucky enough to have citrus. Then you sit in direct sunlight for hours, sweating and stinking while your scalp slowly cooks. The sun is the activator, your medieval UV lamp. No umbrella, no hat, just determination and mild ammonia burns. If you're wealthy, you wear a special blonding cap, kind of like a medieval swim cap with holes in the top. It lets your treated hair peek through while protecting your precious pale skin from getting gasp tanned. Remember, pale skin is everything, so you sit like a statue, glowing under the sun, head sizzling, body shaded. And the results? Uneven. Sometimes your hair turns a flattering wheat gold. Other times, yellow-green, straw-coloured, or just brittle mush that breaks off in tufts. But hey, at least you tried. There's an odd fringe belief floating around that hair bleached in this way absorbs sunlight and purifies too. Spirit. One 14th century herbal guide claims it lets in God's light through the crown. Science? No. Commitment? Absolutely. Now, if you're not into chemical warfare, you can try the gentler methods, like rubbing chamomile or saffron into your scalp. It smells better, but results take weeks, and patience isn't exactly fashionable. Wigs? Rare, but not unheard of. In Venetian courts, women wore fine hairpieces made of goat hair, or even human hair from the East. Some were dyed before being stitched into elaborate braided halos. But wigs were expensive, and harder to pull off than just frying your natural strands. And what about the men? Oh, they're getting in on it too. Young nobles in court sometimes lightened their hair to look more virile, or to imitate the knights from Arthurian romance tales. You know, the ones with flowing golden locks and impossibly clean armour. But there's a catch. You can't look like you're trying. If your bleached hair is too obvious, too fake, you might be accused of vanity or deception. So the goal is effortless effort. You're supposed to glow like a sunbeam without anyone realizing you spent 3 days with your head in a chemical stew. And if it all fails, if your hair stays stubbornly dark, you hide it. A gauzy veil, a wimple, maybe even a linen hood in pale gold. The illusion is more important than the truth. Here's a weird little tidbit. In some parts of medieval England, women believed that rubbing crushed barley flour into their hair while reciting a specific psalm could lighten it overnight. It didn't work, but you'd at least feel holy while trying. So now, back in your chamber, your hair is dry. It crackles slightly when you comb it. You pin it up, wrap it in a soft cloth, and admire the subtle golden streaks catching the firelight. You smell earthy, but you look faintly sunlit, like a holy painting come to life. Your head itches, you try not to scratch. A knock at the door. Your friend has arrived to walk with you to the May Day festival. She's glowing with soft curls and pale skin. You both exchange that glance, the one that says, "I know what you went through for this hair," and without a word, you step out into the dusk together, your blonde ambition shimmering in the wind. You glance at your hands in the morning light. They're too brown. Not from dirt. You scrubbed them last night with vinegar and chalk, but from the sun. Just one afternoon walking through the market without gloves, and now your knuckles betray you. You're ashamed and you're worried. Because in the medieval world, your complexion isn't just your skin, it's your soul. Fairness isn't only fashionable, it's moral. Pale skin means purity, goodness, spiritual cleanliness. Tanned or freckled, that's suspicious. Maybe you're promiscuous. Maybe you've sinned. Maybe you're a peasant. In this society, beauty is a spiritual condition, and your face is the confession. To fix things, you reach for your little ceramic jar. It's filled with a milky white paste made from white lead and vinegar. Yes, again with the lead. You gently smear it over your face, your neck, your hands, anywhere that needs divine correction. The result is a flat, powdered look, with a waxy glow and the faint scent of something metallic. This is how you chase translucence, the medieval version of glass skin. Not dewy or plump, but pale, cold and bloodless. Think marble statue, not Instagram model. Historians still argue whether this standard came from classical Roman ideals or from early Christian iconography. Either way, by the 13th century, the consensus was clear. Light skin, ill virtue. Dark skin, ill suspicion. Even scars had meaning. A single pockmark, left over from childhood illness, could change your marriage prospects. And freckles, little stains of moral impurity. You dab at them with lemon juice and pray they fade. There's a fringe folk cure in southern France involving goat milk and powdered lily root. Supposedly it bleaches the spirit through the skin. More likely it just makes you smell like a flower shop in a dairy barn. And what about natural flush? A healthy glow? Forget it. You're aiming for something cooler, more controlled. Your lips can be gently pink. Your cheeks, only the faintest touch of rose. Anything more and you risk looking earthy. A coded insult for women who work outdoors. AKA not noble. AKA not desirable. You remember a girl from your village, Marta. She was stunning. Strong jaw, sun-kissed skin, vivid eyes. Men watched her pass like moths to flame, but her tan was too deep. The priest called her marked by temptation. She was married off to a tanner's son, then vanished from court gossip entirely. Beautiful, but not the right kind of beautiful. Meanwhile, your noble cousin Anna is pale as unbaked dough, sickly, often bedridden. People whisper of delicate health and angelic constitution. Suitors flock to her, praising her saintly looks. She has never worked a day in her life. She also has 8 marriage proposals. Your skin tone isn't a spectrum, it's a scorecard. Men aren't free from this either. The ideal young knight is pale, untouched by sun or battle, his beauty untouched by the world. Tanned men are often soldiers, labourers or merchants. Useful, yes, but not poetry material. Here's a weird little twist. In some monasteries, monks used crushed pearls mixed with egg whites as a kind of cosmetic penance. It made their faces shimmer in candlelight, ethereal, ghostly. Somehow this was considered holy. You try the same one night, you end up smelling like breakfast, and yet you keep trying. Because this isn't just fashion, it's survival. Appear too rough and you're passed over for invitations, marriages, even charity. Appear too artificial and you're accused of witchcraft or vanity. You're always balancing on the edge of a blade. So tonight, you sit quietly, pressing rose water to your cheeks with a cloth. Your skin stings, your fingers are raw. You apply a final dusting of ground oyster shell. Yes, that's a thing, for extra luminescence. You catch your reflection in the copper basin, pale, symmetrical, blank. You look like someone else, and maybe that's the point. Outside, the bells toll. Another wedding. You're not invited. But you'll walk past the church anyway, gliding slowly, hoping someone notices your glow. And as you pass beneath the rose vines, one thought follows like a shadow. Do they see a woman? Or just her skin? You're strolling past the village green when you hear laughter. It's the kind of carefree sound that makes you turn your head, just in time to see a farm girl toss her hair over her shoulder, cheeks flushed, arms bare from hauling buckets. Her smile is wide, teeth crooked but real. For a second you're jealous. She's glowing. She looks alive. But then you catch the disapproving glance of a passing noblewoman. The girl is barefoot, tanned, her bodice is loose. Peasant pretty, they call it, beautiful by accident, and completely wrong. Because in your world, true beauty must never look like health or labour. It has to be curated, suffered for, expensive, unattainable. This is the great irony of medieval beauty. While the nobility risk their health to look pale, thin, and delicate, the peasants accidentally embody the glow of vitality. But that glow isn't admired, it's condemned. It suggests sex, work, hunger, all the things rich people are desperate to pretend they don't experience. Historians still argue whether peasants were aware of this reversal, or if they simply didn't care. After all, when your life is dictated by weather, land, and tax, looking fashionable isn't a top priority. But some peasants do try. You've seen it. A labourer's daughter sneaks into a chapel with soot darkening her lashes. A miller's wife powders her face with chalk dust. They mimic what they see at the manor. The result is awkward, brave, and often punished, because fashion, like food, is rationed by class. If you're caught dressing above your station, you could be fined. Sumptuary laws, the medieval dress codes, dictated what colours, fabrics, and accessories each class could wear. In 1363, England, for example, peasants were legally forbidden from wearing fur, silk, or velvet. Even certain types of buttons were off-limits. And yes, there were beauty police, not the literal kind, but price. Ests, magistrates, and even jealous neighbours who'd report a woman for wearing something too fine. A farmer's daughter in a bright blue skirt, trouble. A servant with pearl earrings, scandal. Because beauty in this world isn't free, it's owned. But that didn't stop the imitations. You remember your cousin Rosa, a merchant's wife, who secretly mixed berries and chalk to create a passable rouge. She used chicken fat for lip gloss. She shaved her eyebrows to look noble, then drew them back in with burned cork. One day she was invited to a feast with actual landowners. They thought she was foreign. She took it as a compliment. There's a story told by washerwomen in Bruges about a peasant girl who lightened her skin so well with flour paste she caught the eye of a travelling knight. They married, supposedly, but more likely she just got pregnant and disappeared. Not exactly a fairy tale. Even among the nobility, imitation worked in both directions. Fashion often began in court, but sometimes a clever trend bubbled up from the lower classes. Lace-edged aprons, braided hair, soft woolen shawls. When nobles adopted them, the original wearers were shamed. It's the medieval version of cultural appropriation, minus the think pieces. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, prostitutes were required by law to wear specific colours, usually red or yellow. Ironically, those same shades were also favoured by rich young ladies during festivals. Confusing? Absolutely. Deliberate? Probably. It was another way to keep beauty hierarchical. You could look tempting, but only if your name was in the right ledger. And yet the line kept blurring. You've seen noblewomen try to braid their hair like the milkmaids do, loose and low across the neck. You've seen them sneak out without gloves to get a hint of tan. You've heard whispered compliments. She has a peasant's bloom. The truth no one says aloud. Deep down, they envy that accidental beauty. You sit by the window that evening, brushing your pale, thinning hair. Your skin is powdered. Your gown is stiff and costly. You look like a portrait. But part of you wishes you could run barefoot through the grass, cheeks red, breath ragged, face free of paint, just once. Outside, that same farm girl passes again. She's laughing, alive, seen. And you wonder, what would they say if you looked that real? The mirror lies to you, but not by much. Its warped glass reflects the image you've worked so hard to perfect. Pale skin bordering on translucent, tightly bound bodice to flatten your torso, lips faintly tinted with crushed rose. You've avoided sunlight for months, you've barely eaten bread crusts for a week, and your ribs feel like they're about to pierce your gown. Because now, beauty means fragility. It's not enough to look clean or elegant. You must appear like someone who could faint at a strong breeze. The more breakable you look, the more desirable you are. That's the standard, and you chase it like it's the last coin in your purse. This ideal, the one delicate, consumptive look, wasn't invented overnight. Historians still argue whether it came from Christian morality tales or simply evolved from centuries of wealth signalling. Either way, by the 14th century, the beautiful woman was one who looked like she might drop dead at any moment, and do it gracefully. You've heard poets praise ivory maidens with eyes dimmed by sorrow. Artists paint noble women with thin wrists and hollow cheeks. even the Virgin Mary, depicted in murals and altarpieces, often looks half-starved. The message is clear. True beauty is next to godliness, and godliness means self-denial. So you deny yourself. You skip meals, you suck in your stomach until it cramps, you lay a white lead on your face, even though the apothecary's assistant warned you it might cause headaches, blackened gums, or worse. But what choice do you have? This is the game, and you're not just playing it, you are it. A fringe remedy makes its rounds through the noble households. Tapeworms. Yes, actual parasites. Wealthy women would allegedly ingest tapeworm eggs to lose weight without appearing to diet. While modern historians debate whether this was widespread or just legend, the idea alone says a lot about how far people would go to look like they're wasting away. Here's another quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, it was fashionable to have blue veins visible on pale skin. Women would draw them on with fine brushes, mimicking the thin skin of infants and the sickly. The more ghost-like, the better. Of course, this obsession with frailty wasn't just aesthetic, it was political. A woman who looked weak needed protection, she needed shelter, she needed a husband, preferably rich and powerful. Beauty, in this sense, becomes a strategy. A delicate appearance keeps you dependent, keeps you owned. It tells the world, I don't labour, I don't sweat, I'm precious, handle me carefully. Meanwhile, the men, their beauty standards couldn't be more different. Strong shoulders, ruddy complexions, calloused hands were fine, even sexy. If you were a knight or landowner, you had to resemble a dying dove. He had to look like he could kill a boar before breakfast. And this isn't just social, it's religious. Christianity, especially in its medieval form, often treated the body as a source of sin. The flesh must be tamed, punished, purified. Fasting became fashionable, not for health, but for holiness. Saints were praised for starving themselves into visions. Women took this to heart. Some even saw beauty suffering as a spiritual practice. One nun in 14th century Siena, Saint Catherine, allegedly survived for years on nothing but water and the Eucharist. Her emaciation was considered divine. Though you probably aren't trying to become a saint, you can't help but admire that level of commitment, dangerous as it was. Your cousin tried the holy route. She wore a hair shirt under her gown to mortify the flesh. It gave her welts. She smiled through the pain. She claimed men started noticing her more after that. It makes you wonder, is this even about beauty anymore? Or is it a test of willpower? You go to a feast that night and the contrast hits hard. Some women arrive in heavy gowns that cinch the waist so tightly they can't sit. One girl faints during the blessing. No one panics. It's expected. A tiny collapse, equal high status. You chew slowly on a single fig. The meats and pies pass by your face, steaming with temptation. You smile demurely and refuse them all. A nearby nobleman nods in approval. Such restraint, he says. You feel dizzy. Still, you smile. Later, in the candlelit corridor, you overhear a group of older women whispering about another girl, Isolde, the Count's niece, who's grown plump. They cluck their tongues. Indulgent, one says. Unmarriageable, says another. Isolde is only 14. You make a note to skip tomorrow's breakfast, and so the cycle continues. You dream of a world where beauty means joy, laughter, fresh cheeks from running, not from rouge. A world where you could be beautiful because you're strong, not in spite of it. But for now, you remain porcelain, crackable, coveted, compliant. You feel a faint ache in your jaw from clenching all day, not from anger, but from smiling. Because beauty in your world isn't just what you look like, it's how convincingly you perform it. And performance, as you now understand, is an exhausting full-time job. You have to tilt your head at the right angle, bat your lashes modestly, speak gently and walk slowly. No sudden movements, no firm footsteps. You must be the embodiment of composure. If your laugh is too loud, your shoulders too straight, your stride too confident, you might as well have grown horns. Beauty in medieval Europe isn't passive, it's a calculated pose, and nowhere is this clearer than in courtly culture. By the 12th century, romantic love, especially in noble circles, becomes a theatre of elegance and restraint. Poets in France and Germany spin tales of ladies so refined they float rather than walk, of skin so pale it's moonlit silk. You've read a few of these ballads. Everyone pretends they're about honour, but really they're just setting the bar impossibly high for everyone else. Your cousin once tried copying a poem's described beauty ritual. boiling rose petals in goat's milk to wash her hair. It didn't go well. She smelled like a barn and sneezed through mass, but the story still gets laughs at dinner. Quiet ones, of course, elegant chuckles. And yet it's hard to laugh too hard when you realise how tightly these performances bind you. Every movement is rehearsed, every gaze calculated. There's a correct way to sip from a goblet, a correct way to sit. Even crying must be beautiful. Tears should shimmer delicately, like a crystal about to fall, not a storm of snot and sobs. One misstep, one smudge of black ash around the eyes, and you're labelled crude, lowborn, unrefined. The funny part? Men say they want beauty, but also get suspicious of it. You remember the priest's sermon last week? H. He warned the congregation about wanton women who tempt with false beauty. He said cosmetics were tools of the devil. He cited St. Jerome, who once called painted women monuments of decay. You shifted in your pew, trying to hide the faint blush of saffron you dabbed on your cheeks. The woman next to you smelled of lavender. You suspect hers wasn't entirely natural either. Historians still debate how widespread the use of cosmetics actually was, especially among the lower classes. Some argue it was rare and dangerous due to toxic ingredients. Others point out medieval recipe books that detail elaborate beauty treatments. What is clear, though, is that even whispering about using rouge or white lead could ruin your reputation. And if you were caught, you'd be branded deceptive. There's a strange paradox here. You're expected to be beautiful, but not to try too hard. True beauty, the poets say, should be effortless, natural, like dew on grass or petals at dawn. Of course, no one actually looks like that, not after a week of washing clothes or scraping carrots in the cold, but the illusion must be maintained. So you hide your efforts. You grind crushed pearls into powder in secret. You sleep with your hair tied high to train its shape. You wear veils to conceal blemishes and hope no one notices the smell of vinegar and herbs on your skin. You become a magician of appearance, performing sorcery with brushes and oils, but never calling it magic. That would be dangerous. In fact, beauty could get very dangerous. There are stories, whispered ones, of women accused of witchcraft simply for being too beautiful. Or worse, too alluring after a certain age. If you remained attractive past childbearing years, some assumed you must have made a deal with something dark. How else could you defy time? Marjorie down the lane was once admired for her thick, dark hair even in her 40s. Then one winter, a cow died mysteriously, and suddenly Marjorie became suspicious. People muttered. She stopped coming to the market. A month later, she was gone. No one talks about her now. You've learned to lower your gaze when walking past the older men who linger too long. Too much attention is as dangerous as too little. A fine line exists between being seen and being safe. And here's the kicker. Beauty isn't just demanded of you. It's rewarded and punished in equal measure. You remember Alina, the baker's daughter. Lovely, funny, loud, too loud. Her laugh could echo through the square. She caught the eye of the local magistrate's son and actually believed it meant something. For a few months, she lived like she belonged among nobility. Then she got pregnant. Now no one says her name out loud. You pass her in the street sometimes. She doesn't laugh anymore. The message couldn't be clearer. Beauty makes you visible, and visibility makes you vulnerable. But you can't not be beautiful. That's the real cruelty. You must strive for something that can turn against you at any moment, like a flame too close to a hemline. Quirky footnote. There were actual medieval beauty manuals circulating in noble households. One from 14th century Italy advised women to paint their gums with burnt almond to darken them prettily. Another CLA, I'm that frog fat's softened rough elbows. One suggested applying pigeon droppings mixed with vinegar to lighten freckles. Yes, pigeon droppings. A reminder that even the most dainty ideals were built on very grim foundations. You wonder what all this means for your daughter, if you ever have one. Will she inherit this strange burden, this endless performance? You hope not. But even that hope feels like a kind of rebellion. For now, you straighten your posture, touch your lips with the faintest hint of beet juice, and step back into the world. Always smiling, always careful, always beautiful, whether you want to be or not. You wake before dawn, not because the rooster crowed or because the chores beckon, though they do, but because you need time before anyone sees you, time to prepare the mask. Not a literal one, of course, that would be too obvious. But in the early morning shadows, before the fire has caught and the water has boiled, you gather your herbs, your powders, your tools of illusion. You rub crushed rosemary on your scalp, hoping it thickens your thinning hair. You mix ashes with rainwater to darken your brows. A tiny mirror, barely bigger than a coin, sits propped against a basket. In it you study your reflection not for beauty, but for flaws, lines, redness, bumps, imperfections that might be mistaken for disease or worse, sin. Because in your time, beauty is not an indulgence, it is armor. It protects you from judgment, from gossip, from accusations whispered behind veils and over pews. And just as often, it's a trap. Once your neighbour's sister was admired for her looks. Every man in the village noticed. But one day, after she refused a nobleman's advances, the rumours began that her beauty was unnatural, that she kept herbs not for medicine but for spells. 1 week later, her cottage was burned. You remember the smell of smoke. You remember not saying anything, because you couldn't, you wouldn't dare. That is the other edge of beauty in the medieval world. It gives you no power of your own. It grants you visibility but not safety, influence but not autonomy. You're seen, praised, desired but never truly respected, not unless you're quiet, obedient, dignified, ideally married, ideally silent. And yet there's a strange comfort in the rituals, in the rosewater baths, the braided hair, the sewing of delicate trims into the neckline of your kirtle. These acts feel like a language, one passed down from mother to daughter, a form of survival through ornament, of co. First, the church doesn't quite agree. Last Sunday, the priest delivered another fiery sermon. He quoted St. Cyprian this time, warning women not to shame the image of God with their cosmetics. He said painted faces were a lie, that a woman who alters her appearance is not only vain, but sinful. And you stood there, face powdered with finely ground chalk, and nodded along, because you must. In medieval Europe, beauty exists under a microscope of morality. Too plain, and you're lazy. Too adorned, and you're prideful. Too alluring, and you're dangerous. Too old, and you're irrelevant. It's a game you cannot win, a set of rules that contradict at every turn. You think of your mother again, how she used to pluck her chin in the dark, cursing the single coarse hair that always returned, no matter how many times she removed it. She once whispered to you, "It's the devil's thread. He ties it back every night." You laughed, then plucked your own. Even men aren't immune to this absurdity. Your brother, a miller's apprentice, was mocked once for having too thick of arms. The local bailiff said he looked beastly. When your brother tried to slim himself down, skipping meals, binding his upper arms under his shirt, he was then teased for being too vain. No one is exempt. Only the wealthy have the luxury of being naturally beautiful, even if that beauty is bought through imported perfumes, crushed sapphires for eyeshadow, or surgical procedures performed by trembling monks with sharp knives and prayer books. Surgical beauty isn't common, but it exists. A 13th century text describes a noblewoman who had her nose reshaped after a fall. She was praised for her bravery. But a peasant woman with a crooked nose, she'd be called cursed, and there it is again. Class. Behind every beauty rule is a ladder, and you're climbing it barefoot. Even your clothes speak. That delicate trim on your sleeve, it tells people you can afford a needle and thread, maybe even a servant. Your braided hair, it shows time and care, a luxury not everyone has. Your pale skin, it says you don't toil under the sun like the labourers. But what happens when a labourer has pale skin too, or when a noblewoman gets sunburned? Then you get hierarchy dressed as morality. They'll say, "She must be lazy," or "She's ignoring her duties," or "God is punishing her." So much of beauty, you realise, is just an illusion of control. Control over your environment, your station, your fate. But deep down, you know you're not in control at all. Even queens aren't. Take Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, who was considered one of the most beautiful women of her time. Portraits show her with ivory skin, golden curls, high cheekbones. Poets wrote of her grace. But behind palace walls, rumours swirled that she was vain, that she used potions, that she was unfaithful. No amount of beauty ever bought her peace. And if she couldn't win the game, what hope do you have? Still you press on, Because the world demands it, because your safety, your livelihood, even your marriage prospects hinge on it, because you want to be liked, admired, respected, maybe even loved. And because, if you're honest, there are moments rare and fleeting when you look into that tiny mirror and think, yes, this is me, I am beautiful. Even if no one else agrees, even if the world makes it impossible, even if the cost is everything. You didn't choose these rules, but you learned them early. By the age of 7, you already knew that dirty fingernails meant poor breeding, even if they came from helping your mother scrub pots. You'd heard women whisper that a girl with a broad nose was unmarriageable, and watched them recommend pinching it daily with clothespins to narrow the bridge. By 10, you learned to hold your back straight, never walk with haste, and never laugh too loudly. A proper young lady must be graceful, silent, and unthreatening, like a living sculpture. The more invisible your labour, the more beautiful your presence. By 13, you knew that breasts should be small, waistlines impossibly narrow, and hips childlike, desirable not for what they are, but what they promise: youth, purity, obedience. In short, the illusion of virginity. Beauty, you learned, was performance, a daily theatre of flesh and fabric, the audience, everyone, especially men. Because in medieval Europe, a woman's beauty isn't just an aesthetic preference, it's her social capital. It's how her father secures a better match, how her husband earns more dowry, how her family's status is improved. You are currency, and your appearance determines your value. Even your walk is practiced. You don't stomp, you glide. Your hands don't swing freely, they rest gently at your sides or hold something delicate, a flower, a prayer book, a rosary. Your head stays slightly bowed, direct eye contact is bold, too bold. You're told to let your beauty speak for you. But in reality, it speaks over you. And heaven help the girl who is born outside of these norms. Maybe she's too tall, too dark, has hair that frizzes, teeth that gap, a mole under the eye, skin that reddens, hands that are too large. If she's lucky, she's ignored. If not, she's accused of sin or sorcery, because medieval beauty is not about what's natural, as it's about what's controlled. And the more tightly a woman can control herself, the more highly she is praised. Take hair, for example. Loosened hair on a married woman? Scandalous. A girl wearing it uncovered before marriage? Shameful. But hair braided and covered modestly with a veil or wimple? That's respectability. So when you sit by the hearth every night, brushing your hair 100 strokes, it's not vanity, it's survival. Even the seasons conspire against you. In summer, the sun threatens your pale complexion. In winter, the cold cracks your lips and reddens your nose, both signs of poor breeding. You crush violets into ointments, steep marigolds in water, and whisper prayers as you apply them, hoping not just for beauty, but for favour. You heard once that in Florence, a noblewoman bathed in wine to preserve her youth. Another in Avignon drank powdered pearls for her complexion. Though she died young, her skin reportedly glowed in her coffin. That's the thing about medieval beauty. It's often deadly. Lead-based powders to lighten the skin, mercury salves for blemishes, belladonna drops to dilate your pupils, making your eyes look large and innocent, though at the cost of blindness. Each product promises divine elegance, but carries hellish consequences. And still, you use them, because the alternative is worse, to be seen as ugly. And ugly means undesirable, and undesirable means disposable. So you endure. You watch the daughters of your neighbours marry off one by one, often to men twice their age. Their beauty bought the match, but rarely spared them hardship. You see bruises behind veils, sadness behind powdered smiles, and still you brush your hair and rub balm into your cheeks, because that is what is expected. And then there are the outliers, women who reject the rules altogether. The nun who shaved her head to avoid marriage, the widow who wears black and lets her skin weather, the healer who dares to go unpainted, unbothered, and free. You admire them, quietly, from afar, because that kind of freedom costs more than beauty ever will. It costs protection, status, in some cases even safety. An unmarried woman with no male guardian? Suspect. An older woman with no children? Witch. A woman with no husband? A burden, or worse, property. In such a world, beauty is one of the few tools you possess. Blunted and double-edged though it may be, you wield it like a blade. But you also notice the cracks forming in the system. You hear your younger cousin whisper that she thinks red cheeks look healthier than white ones. You see girls trading berry juice for lip colour. You hear songs praising women with sun-kissed skin, even if sung in secret. The world, perhaps, is beginning to shift. Even the paintings show it. Artists begin to paint women with curves, with rosier hues, with eyes that don't avoid the viewer but meet their gaze directly. Bold, present, real. And you wonder, could this be the beginning of something new, or just another phase in a never-ending performance? Either way, you still rise before dawn. You still press rosemary into your scalp and pinch your nose and bite your lips for colour. Because in your world, even as the future whispers promises of change, the present demands obedience. And beauty is the language you were taught to speak. Pretty pain. Beauty as punishment in daily life. Your body is not your own. It belongs to mirrors, mothers, men, and myth. You wake up to cold water and colder glances if you don't present yourself properly. Beauty is not indulgence here, it's a discipline, like fasting or penance, and it hurts just as much. The pain is small and constant, a plucked brow, a scraped heel, a corset-tight girdle that presses on your ribs until your breathing is shallow and ladylike. You whisper prayers before you sit at the vanity. Dear Lord, let me be pleasing. Let me be enough. Not for God, mind you, but for the world that judges your face before your soul. You look at your reflection. It's not glass. It's polished metal, maybe bronze. Your face swims in the dim gleam, warped by the surface. Still, you know what to fix. Your lips are too thin, so you rub in crushed rose petals soaked in vinegar. It stings. That means it's working. Your lashes are short. You dip a twig in soot and rub it across the lash line. You blink away the burn. That means it's working. You notice a spot forming near your chin. You whisper a curse against the evil eye, then smear on a concoction of chalk and ground-up bone. Everything is a ritual, a mask, a quiet act of violence. You've heard of noblewomen fainting at court because they refused to eat. Hollow cheeks were considered elegant. Others wear tight bodices that rearrange their internal organs. At least they look regal. Even bathing is dangerous. Warm water opens pores, and that means sickness can enter the body. Too much bathing makes you weak, but not bathing at all makes you unclean. So you compromise. Wash only the visible parts: face, hands, feet. Your body is scrubbed like a floor and painted like a fresco, all in the name of beauty. The irony? Most of this isn't for seduction, it's for submission. You're not trying to tempt, you are trying to survive. A woman who refuses beauty is wild. One who fails at it is lazy. One who succeeds too much is vain. There's no winning, only performance. And it doesn't stop at youth. Old women are pressured too. A noble dowager must maintain the illusion of elegance well into widowhood. She wears face veils, not to grieve, but to hide sagging skin. She uses honey and vinegar to tighten the flesh. She drinks gold dust to preserve a radiant glow, despite its price and its poison. You see what this life costs, and yet you continue the ritual, because beauty brings protection. A pretty face can soften a father's rage. A delicate voice can win favour in the marketplace. A carefully painted smile can hide the scream beneath it. It's armour, but it's also a trap. The older women speak of it in hushed tones. Pretty girls live hard lives, too beautiful, and the devil will knock. God save the woman whose beauty makes men forget their vows. And beneath that, always the warning. Beauty is dangerous. To others. To you. So you learn to walk the line. To be beautiful, but not seductive. To be graceful, but not proud. To be clean, but not vain. To be seen, but not desired. And still, none of it guarantees happiness. You remember the girl in the next village, born with fair hair and skin like milk. She was wed at 13 to a man twice her age. She died in childbirth before 15. The townspeople said, "What a beauty." They said it at her funeral, because to them her life was a work of art. And like most medieval art, it ended in tragedy. So tonight, when you unbind your hair and scrape the pigment from your cheeks, you don't feel relief. You feel raw, like you've peeled away a layer of yourself just to face the world. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. Because that's what it means to be beautiful in the Middle Ages. A constant balancing act between pleasure and pain, between power and peril, between what you are and what you're supposed to be. You are not your own, not yet, but you're learning, and maybe, just maybe, some part of you is ready to fight back. Mirror, mirror, medieval reflections and inner worth. You're staring at your reflection again, but this time not out of vanity. You're trying to see yourself, really see yourself, and in the Middle Ages that's not easy. There are no perfect mirrors, no HD selfies, just a bit of polished bronze, tin-backed glass if you're lucky, maybe even still water in a bowl, wobbly, ghost-like, not quite right. You lean in, searching for answers in the shimmer. And what do you see? Do you look holy enough, humble enough, beautiful enough to be believed? See, beauty back then isn't just about looks. It's tangled up with morality. A pretty face? That's proof of purity. A lopsided nose or uneven teeth? Maybe a sign of inner corruption. Your outer form is seen as a message from God or a warning. And scholars? Oh, they have thoughts. Thomas Aquinas, bless him, insists that beauty is tied to proportion, clarity, and integrity, which is just a fancy way of saying symmetry equals virtue, shine equals cleanliness equals godliness. Flaws? Well, they must reflect sins. And the church laps that right up. You hear it in sermons. Guard your eyes, for vanity leads to damnation. God sees not your painted cheeks, but your painted soul. You're constantly being told that real beauty is spiritual, but also somehow you're still judged by the shape of your jaw. It's confusing, right? You're supposed to downplay your appearance to be virtuous, but also expected to remain attractive to secure a good marriage. Act too modest. You're accused of hiding something. Act too bold. You're branded a harlot. One friar even says women should avoid mirrors lest they become enamoured with the devil's reflection. Okay, Gregor, calm down. But that's the climate you're in. The mirror isn't your friend, it's your judge, and worse, it's a moving target. What's considered beautiful shifts constantly. Plumpness in one decade, slenderness in another. Long necks, high foreheads, pale skin, those are always in. But the details change, just like fashion. And sometimes it gets really weird. For example, have you heard of nasofixation? Some 14th century texts equate nose shape with moral character. A straight, narrow nose is divine. A wide one, earthy. A hooked one, sinister. One theologian even writes that Eve's nose was the original model of human perfection. Imagine being compared to a biblical nasal standard. Then there's the blemish panic. Pimples, unclean, birthmarks, possibly witchcraft, a mole near the mouth. Ooh, seductive, maybe too seductive. Historians still argue whether women in noble courts were deliberately hiding facial moles for fear of being linked to the devil, or simply covering them up for fashion. Either way, one little freckle could ruin your reputation. And if that wasn't enough pressure, add this. Men weren't exempt from beauty standards either. You think your brother's off playing knights and drinking mead? Nope. He's in front of a candlelit mirror, trimming his beard and dusting his tunic with violet-scented powder. Why? Because court ladies have opinions. A strong chin, broad shoulders and clear skin mark him as noble. Too thin, he's weak. Too fat, he's gluttonous. Even monks had beauty standards. Long, uncut nails were frowned upon. Dry skin meant poor self-discipline. A shiny tonsure? That was high holiness. A dull one? Slippery slope to temptation. It's exhausting, all this coded messaging. Looks that imply virtue. Virtue that implies status. Status that determines survival. And it loops back again. You look into that blurry, unkind mirror and wonder, who am I if I'm not beautiful today? Will they still listen? Will they still love me? Will they even see me? But here's the twist. Sometimes people do rebel. There are whispers of mystics who shaved their heads in protest, wives who wore sackcloth in defiance of fashion, peasant girls who smeared ash on their faces to avoid the attention of lords. They're rare, but they exist. And in a world ruled by the gaze of others, even the act of looking away can be revolutionary. So maybe tonight, when you walk past that warped bronze mirror, you choose not to stop. You keep going. You remember that you are more than your reflection, that your worth isn't carved into your cheekbones. And maybe you start to believe it, a little, even here, even now. In a time when beauty is power, pressure and peril all at once, you find the smallest sliver of peace in the quiet thought, you don't owe anyone your loveliness. The long fade, how beauty quietly ruled the medieval world. The candles are lower now. Your room, your bed, the ancient air around you, it all begins to hush, and so does the obsession. But not entirely, because you're still living in a time when beauty is lawless, shifting, and quietly all-consuming. You think again of the high foreheads, the tiny waists, the toxic white lead dusted on cheeks like death in disguise, the gowns so tight you could faint, the hair so bleached it snapped off in your hands. You followed these standards not because you're shallow, but because you must. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty is currency. It buys you marriage. It buys you survival. Sometimes it even buys you forgiveness. Let's not forget the courts and courtiers, where a noblewoman's appeal could soften the king's verdict or redirect a duke's wrath. The way your looks could become a political tool, a weapon sheathed in silk. And what about the young girls sent to abbeys for not being suitable matches? Not just because of dowries, but also because they didn't fit the mould. Too dark, too thin, too scarred, too loud. As if salvation was easier than courtship. Over time, these standards become folklore, passed down like poisoned heirlooms. Mothers teach daughters to suffer prettily. Fathers whisper warnings about vanity, but still measure a woman's worth in features. And the church? Oh, the church never stops weighing in. Saints are always beautiful. Demons are always disfigured. The divine glows. The damned decay. What does that tell you? That ugliness is dangerous? That beauty is next to godliness? Or that this whole system, while ancient, is hauntingly familiar? Because even now, long past the castles and plague carts, the whispers remain. Your features still speak before you do. Your body still enters the room before your words. But there's hope in recognizing the game, in naming it, in seeing how far back it goes. And in remembering that even in the brutal logic of the medieval world, there were rebels. There were thinkers, mystics, artists, and ordinary folk who looked past the mirror, who saw the soul beneath the blush. You, reader, dreamer, traveller, you are part of that lineage. You've walked through centuries of powdered skin and plucked brows, through corsets of judgment and gowns of expectation. And now, here in the dark quiet of sleep, you finally put it down. Let the mirror rest. Let the rules unravel. Let your face, in all its imperfect glory, be enough. Because in truth, it always was. Sleep now, with your own image fading softly into the dark. History is over. You're free.